I believe that if countries adopt a Bitcoin standard and understand Bitcoin, you'll see more favorable legislation being passed, better treatment of their citizens. Well, the Bitcoin bond is really what a lot of the Bitcoin treasury companies are doing, but at a sovereign level.
In the Bitcoin era, having a financial advisor is like having a McDonald's as your nutritionist.
You'll end up with fiat currencies collapsing in a spectacular fashion around the world. We are talking to a country right now that is very much interested to do Bitcoin bonds. I can't disclose it. Oil-rich countries could put oil in a barrel and put it on a boat and send it to wherever. And now with Bitcoin, you can mine Bitcoin with stranded energy or excess energy and sell that globally in a 24/7 market. People do look for permission, and not everyone is like a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist with laser eyes. And I think this is the best defense we have to a very Orwellian future.
Welcome to another episode of the Citizen X podcast. When it comes to the intersection of Bitcoin and nation states, I believe there's no second best. Samson Mo, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
I would like to start with a small introduction of your journey to Bitcoin, from your work at Blockstream to founding Jan3 and focusing on nation-state Bitcoin adoption. Can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. My journey into Bitcoin is not that exciting. I just read about it a lot and was very interested in it. And then I just happened to stumble into an exchange called BTC China back in late 2014. And I started out as an advisor and eventually became the COO there. And I got pulled into the block size war because we also ran a mining pool. And the developers kind of split at that time with Gavin Andresen and Mike Hearn, and they were pushing Bitcoin XT. So that's how I kind of got into a lot of the deeper level of Bitcoin structure and development. But I stayed there for a couple of years, and eventually I moved to Blockstream and joined Adam Back. I was the CSO at Blockstream for, I think, close to 5 years or more than 5 years, and helped launch Liquid Network and did a bunch of other cool stuff. And along that journey, I started working with countries to implement Bitcoin strategies, notably El Salvador with their Bitcoin law. And I decided to start Jan3 to kind of focus more on nation-state adoption.
Why is nation-state Bitcoin adoption important for you?
Well, I think it has to do with a number of things. So the first and foremost is I believe that if countries adopt a Bitcoin standard and understand Bitcoin, you'll see more favorable legislation being passed, better treatment of their citizens, because I think Bitcoin does change. It will change countries. It changes individuals, and individuals make up governments. Like everyone's a person there. And if they understand the ethos of Bitcoin, why property rights, why the ability to build wealth is important, and why things like a bearer asset are important, that'll inform a lot of other policies that governments push forward. And I think this is the best defense we have to a very Orwellian future. So we can build technologies, we can build more peer-to-peer systems, we can decentralize things, but ultimately it comes down to the people in charge and what their worldview is. And I think if we can get them to embrace Bitcoin, then we'll end up with a better world. The other part is just having countries implement a Bitcoin strategy early on. I see that as a net positive for the citizens of those countries, because if the government adopts it, it's sort of a blessing and the people will adopt it too. There's many countries around the world where you cannot spend Bitcoin technically. Like merchants won't accept it because it's not allowed. Indonesia is one, and there are many other countries around the world. And without a blessing, then the people will never really fully get into Bitcoin. So if you can start from the top down and orange pill the government or the president or prime minister, maybe they'll say something and people will start to embrace Bitcoin or even learn about it, because people do look for permission. And Not everyone is like a hardcore Bitcoin maximalist with laser eyes. They want somebody to tell them Bitcoin is okay. So I think that is a big reason. But also, if countries get into Bitcoin earlier on, I believe that's a way to make the transition to a hyper Bitcoinized world smoother. If you look at history and demonetization events when countries pull notes out of circulation, India is a good example. There's a massive amount of chaos because there's uncertainty in the money. And if you think of Bitcoin, hyper Bitcoinization as a fast event, which I believe is going to be the case, you'll end up with fiat currencies collapsing in a spectacular fashion around the world. And people will be either moving to stablecoins like USDT or moving to Bitcoin in a very short amount of time. And that's going to be a very chaotic transition. So, what you want is to have that parallel system of Bitcoin in place and the knowledge to move to Bitcoin. Because in a chaotic transition, there will be scammers and just massive amounts of people losing money and buying the wrong thing. They might buy a fake Bitcoin, like Bitcoin Cash or something like that, because someone told them this is Bitcoin and they think that is Bitcoin, or just an outright scam, which Bitcoin Cash was kind of, so is kind of. So yeah, I think that there's a number of reasons, but those are the top reasons why we do what we do and we focus on nation state adoption.
Yeah, it's like a plan B for the nation state. It's too late when you need it, so better to get it in place.
Pretty much. And then if you look at nation state accumulation, like a country, a sovereign nation buying Bitcoin, there's a long lead time. Even if they want to do it, like how do they do it? They need legislation for how they're going to custody the Bitcoin. It's not just like the president has it in a wallet somewhere and if he leaves it, Bitcoin's gone. They need some more robust system that can survive a transition in government, ideally, and that is sovereign, ideally. So not just keeping it with a custodian, say in the US, but in a series of vaults in some robust, secure system in the country itself. And then how do they buy Bitcoin? Like large amounts of Bitcoin. They can't just buy locally on exchanges. They need some way to buy globally to tap into the global pool of Bitcoin liquidity. So there's so many things that need to be done outside of just orange pilling. And this is kind of what our approach is. We tell them, if you want to buy Bitcoin, you're going to have to do these things first. So let's talk about how you get there.
Yeah, we'll get into hyper Bitcoinization later, as well as some of your frameworks for acquiring Bitcoin in budget neutral ways like Bitcoin bonds. But I would like to talk about first, you mentioned top down adoption, that is basically orange pilling the leaders of the country, the politicians. But also something that you do is bottom up adoption with things like Aqua Wallet that basically empowers individuals. And you have said that is the most private wallet out there. You really like to focus on helping people preserve their privacy when they use Bitcoin. Can you tell us a bit more about how Aqua Wallet preserves the privacy of Bitcoiners?
Yeah, so Aqua Wallet is a Bitcoin wallet that also supports the Liquid sidechain. So Liquid is the base or foundation of the wallet, but you have both Bitcoin and Liquid Bitcoin. And it is private because Liquid has confidential transactions. And when you're sending out from Aqua, you're doing an atomic swap through bolts. It's a Bitcoin exchange, and you're swapping into a Lightning payment. So you're making a Lightning payment from something that's already confidential, which is your Liquid Bitcoin balance. And I think this is maybe outside of running your own Lightning node, maybe the best privacy preserving way to spend Bitcoin over Lightning, because a lot of the even the self-custodial Lightning wallets, they have an LSP behind, a Lightning service provider. And I think Phoenix Wallet has posted before that it's not that privacy preserving because the LSP knows everything that you're doing from day one because they're doing all the Lightning transactions from you and you open a channel and you paid them to open the channel too. So, if they can identify the Bitcoin that you open the channel with, then they kind of know everything you're doing throughout the whole life cycle of your spending habits. So I think Aqua is one of the best, if not the best, way to spend Bitcoin privately right now. And we also have the Dolphin card too, which is a prepaid Visa card that you can top up with Liquid Bitcoin or Liquid USDT. And Liquid USDT is also confidential too on the Liquid network. So it's like a very comprehensive, easy to use solution for people to go forth and spend their Bitcoin, and privacy is preserved as much as possible along the entire path.
Great. And then the next step, going a bit above the individual, when it comes to the nation state accumulating Bitcoin in budget neutral ways, why using a Bitcoin bond as a nation state strategy to accumulate Bitcoin? I know you were in DC some weeks ago talking about this model, also in Paraguay. Why would you advise a nation state to use the Bitcoin bond?
Well, the Bitcoin bond is really what a lot of the Bitcoin treasury companies are doing, but at a sovereign level. And I think maybe Saylor copied the idea, but we'll see. It's TBD. But it's issuing sovereign debt. The corporate Bitcoin treasury companies are issuing corporate debt effectively, or preferred shares. It's a mix of both now, it seems, but a sovereign country can issue debt. And I think that is one of the best forms of debt because it's not that common for sovereign defaults. And the structure of the Bitcoin bonds that I designed originally were structured in a way that mitigated default because they would buy Bitcoin with a half of the proceeds of the raise, and that after a 10-year period should more than cover the principal. So you know that they have enough capital to pay back. Actually, I think the design was after 5 years, they'll earmark part of the Bitcoin as for the principal repayment, and then they start to share upside by selling or marking to market the Bitcoin with the investors of the bond. So you have a base coupon, and on top of the base coupon, you'll get an extra Bitcoin dividend that is shared with the investor. But the other part of the Bitcoin bond was a revenue generating activity. And this is kind of the magical part because a lot of countries have excess energy. And with Bitcoin, you can monetize excess energy now, where previously you could not. Oil-rich countries could put oil in a barrel and put it on a boat and send it to wherever. And now with Bitcoin, you can mine Bitcoin with stranded energy or excess energy and sell that globally in a 24/7 market. So it really changes the dynamic for energy-rich poor countries, which there are many of. So if you look at just geothermal, the top geothermal potential in the world is the Philippines, number one. Number two is Indonesia. So that is a massive amount of energy that can be monetized. But you also have excess hydro, like Paraguay is another great example of that. They have 4 terawatt hours of excess a year from the Itaipu Dam. And we did some calculations because I did a presentation there, but that is equivalent to something to the order of 1,200 to 1,400 BTC a year that is just being run off or sold at a loss. Like they're selling energy too. And that's the case for many countries, but you can see a prime example in Bhutan, which is, I think, one of the largest nation state holders now of Bitcoin.
The largest BTC per capita.
Yes, the largest BTC per capita. And they've just taken the excess runaway water and turned it into money. And now they're building an airport with that. So this is something that we as Bitcoiners have been talking about for a decade probably. And now it's demonstrably true that you can do this. And this is one of our efforts. We're trying to get countries to do this because, one, it's budget neutral. Two, you're wasting money. And three, you need it. So it makes so much sense. And I think we are talking to a country right now that is very much interested to do Bitcoin bonds. I can't disclose it, but it's likely going to happen. Fingers crossed.
Nice.
And I think that'll set the stage for more and more countries to do this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit similar to what happened, for example, with citizenship programs, golden visas, where we saw, the US doing the Trump card, the gold card,
The
and
gold visa.
the gold Trump card, and now every country has legitimized that process and that sort of program. So I believe definitely, once one country gets into the Bitcoin bonds, more will follow.
Yeah, but there's a little danger here because the US also has a Bitcoin bond proposal. They're called Bitbonds. And I think the proposal was to raise, how much again? $2 trillion or $1 trillion? But I think the Bitcoin purchase was 200 billion. And they would pay a base coupon of like 1%, but they would not have any capital gains associated with it. And there was an upside with the Bitcoin holdings too. So I think if the US does do it, it's difficult for any other country to do it because the US is still the reserve currency issuer of the world, and their debt is the best debt. So if the US does move forward with bit bonds, I don't think it'll be easy for any other country to do that, short of paying a very large coupon. But right now, there's a sweet spot. No one's done it yet. El Salvador did say they were going to do it in 2023. And if they did, they'd be up, a massive amount right now, more than maybe double or more than double. But the window of opportunity is still there to do a Bitcoin bond for a smaller country at a reasonable coupon rate.
That's a very interesting point of view. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is whether you thought that smaller countries, energy-rich countries, would lead the nation-state Bitcoin adoption, or we would see, the big geopolitical powers like the U.S., China, Russia. Although China, it seems like they're more into gold. But I guess that kind of answers the question. I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add.
Well, the smaller countries usually are more agile, and it's easier for them to get legislation through, depending on the political structure. I think for El Salvador, it was very easy because President Bukele controls most of Congress. There are other smaller countries too, like Costa Rica, where the political system is much more, I would say, balanced. There are like 5 or 6 political parties, and they're all about the same. They all have roughly the same power. So it's difficult to get something moved ahead. But a country like Bhutan was able to move very quickly too. So it's a mixed bag, but definitely a larger country coming into Bitcoin in a big way would benefit them a lot more, right? And it would be more impactful to the world too. Like, let's say the US started bit bonds and they started buying 200 billion, and they have the Bitcoin Act, which it would buy 1 million Bitcoin. That's a massive amount of demand right there. But smaller countries are likely to move faster. But the temptation, I think, for a large country is there to print money and buy Bitcoin.
One of the things that I also wanted to hear your take on is on incentives for nation-state Bitcoin adoption. And this is something that some people have discussed when it comes to the U.S. Seizing Bitcoin from quote unquote criminal activities, because nation-state Bitcoin adoption also puts the incentive on the state to seize Bitcoin. So do you think these places that are leading on Bitcoin adoption are also the best for Bitcoin holders to basically have their physical location, not just their allocation on Bitcoin, but also their location in these countries?
Well, I think the risk of seizure is always there. And this is another reason why I think education and getting countries onto a Bitcoin standard is important, because if the government is made up of Bitcoiners, it'll be less likely they'll be inclined to seize, because once you have that precedent, once you have that mechanism, that can be used against you too. So you just have to imagine, like, I was talking to someone about this actually. So gold technically can be seized, but the seizure of gold is relatively simple and straightforward. Either you have it in the bank and then you get 6102'd, or you have some physical gold in your possession and they just go, yoink. But to get Bitcoin out of your head, that requires locking you up in isolation for years, and potentially other things too that are not fun to talk about. But to put yourself in that position as a Bitcoiner, do you want that to happen to you? And if you're the government, when you're not in power, do you want that to happen to you or your children or your family? I think the answer is largely no. So because the process of extraction of private keys from wetware is much more complex, I think there will be more safeguards put into place against that, right? And in a hyper-Bitcoinized world, I think there are many laws that need to come into place that will enshrine privacy, because you could just happen to have a seed phrase in your pocket. You're moving it somewhere, right? And you could get pulled over at a stop and it'll be caught on camera from a body cam of a police officer. What happens then? Like, maybe the police officer didn't read it or memorize it, but someone else with access to the footage would have access to that. And there is not enough levels of protection right now that would defend you against that sort of inadvertent seizure. But I think those things will need to be addressed further down the road, or just in general, protection of your digital information on your devices. Because when you cross borders now, your phone could be seized, and there are a number of tools out there that can download it, and maybe it'll be kept for decryption at a later date when the technology is available. But there are all these things that are weak points that need to be augmented to make people more sovereign and more protected. And we're not really there yet in terms of what governments care about so far. But I think overall, I think the direction is if the government has Bitcoin, knows about Bitcoin, and the people are Bitcoiners, we'll be in a better place.
For sure, for sure. In terms of different places that you feel excited about, you already mentioned Bhutan, other places like Thailand, Costa Rica. Are there any particular countries that you think are especially Bitcoin friendly, or regions maybe in general, maybe Hispanic America or Africa? Or
Yeah, Africa is interesting. I think Latin America is still the ripest for Bitcoin adoption simply because it's more stable and there's more energy. Africa adoption is definitely very interesting and it's more usage of Bitcoin. Like people are using it as money. So it's interesting in that method. But in terms of a nation adopting, I think the potential is definitely in Latin America, I see, or potentially in Southeast Asia. But definitely Africa is on the map for potential adoption too. It's just less politically stable as a whole. But Paraguay is interesting because they have so much excess energy, and we did meet with one senator there that was very keen. It's just a matter of convincing more people. But it'd be so easy for them to start tapping into that or issuing a Bitcoin bond. Argentina is another one. I think maybe with the lifeline extended from the US buying Argentinian pesos, they'll be less keen. But we also modeled out what a Bitcoin bond program for Argentina would look like. And it's possible that in 30 years, they would eradicate all of their debt. And they have a lot of debt. So $30 billion of Bitcoin bonds in 30 years, I think 11 to 30 years, that range could be wiping off their debt. And that's something Malay has talked about. He said maybe it'll take 100, but with Bitcoin, it's like a shortcut. You get there faster. But Thailand was also very encouraging. We had some meetings there with the government, and we put together a proposal. Our chief business officer, Michael, he made a really detailed and sound proposal about creating special economic zones for Bitcoin usage, starting in the tourist islands. And they did start from Phuket, and then now it's nationwide. The sandbox has expanded, and they also removed capital gains taxes too. So Thailand's also interesting.
I'm especially excited about Argentina as well. As you know, they recently approved the citizenship by investment law to launch a citizenship program. We have been, really close advising them. So hopefully, that intersection between bonds and citizenship also has something to do in there. Right now, the only program that accepts investment in government bonds is San Lucia, which is not especially energy rich. Super excited about that as well. And talking about the Americas, I know you chose Prospera, the special economic zone in Honduras, to incorporate Jan 3. Why was that?
Well, we know the guys at Prospera. Good friends with Joel Baumgar, the president there, and they are very much Bitcoiners. They have Bitcoin as legal tender as a law there, and it's also a unit of account. So, it's a good holdout for a Bitcoin country or Bitcoin special economic zone. And we're hopeful that they keep growing. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think free private cities are a great idea in terms of competition and being able to entice and move quickly, entice people to move there and also to progress quickly. But we like Prospera a lot.
Yeah, we also like Prospera. We like free private cities. My co-founder Luis is also an investor in Titus. Is great. Now to wrap up, we can go to the topic of hyper Bitcoinization. You have said that in the Bitcoin era, having a financial advisor is like having a McDonald's as your nutritionist. So how do you envision a Bitcoinized society and the evolving concepts of sovereignty and wealth, both for the individual and the state?
So hyper Bitcoinized state of the world is really just you just use Bitcoin. Nothing else exists in a material way. Maybe fiat currencies exist kind of as a relic or a token, like you want some souvenir. But by and large, everyone is transacting in and saving in Bitcoin. So in that world, it's probably dollar Satoshi parity. So in today's dollar terms, it would be $100 million per Bitcoin. But people would just be paying for things in sats. Everything is denominated in sats, or even sats and sat cents at that point. But it'll be a very different world than what we see today. It'll be based on sound money. So it's like going back to a gold standard, right? But the new gold, which is Bitcoin. So probably less money will be thrown around frivolously. I think people will be more careful about what they spend on, less so on trinkets and throw away things that are not really worth money. Because as people become Bitcoiners, they tend to cut out a lot of the junk in their life and things that they don't need. You leave a much simpler life by and large, and you focus on what matters to you, which is things like family and health and your life. So I think the world will be a largely better place on a hyper Bitcoinized standard.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Samson.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.